All right, welcome to the February 26, 2022 Week in Review. Today we're going to talk all about the Murdaughs. Many new developments in the Murdoch Murders true crime saga. We've got the latest on Donald Trump and his engagement in the pivotal early voting state of South Carolina, and apparently World War III is about to break out. All that and more headed your way on this edition of the Week in Review. So we're going to start with the Murdaughs. And again, this is the saga that has captured the attention of the entire country for several months, which broke exclusively on FITSNews last summer. There were some major developments this week in the Murdoch Saga. We got reports of convoys of Suburbans, brand new Suburbans, Chevy Suburbans, rolling deep into Hampton, South Carolina, into Varnville, South Carolina, into Estill, into Yemassee, into Beaufort, multiple points in the Low Country, the 14th Judicial Circuit, which again was the playground of the Murdoch family and their allies for years. Well, there's an invading force down there now, folks. That's the federal government. Now, we know a lot about the state cases involving the Murdochs, and particularly the 7 different state investigations which center around 53-year-old attorney Alec Murdaugh. But we don't know much about the federal component of this investigation. If you read FITSNews over the last few months, you know that the feds were involved in a limited capacity in some of the state investigations, including the high-profile double homicide investigation in which Alec Murdaugh is a person of interest in the death of his 52-year-old wife and 22-year-old son. But again, we don't know much about what the feds are focused on beyond that. We do know that there were some significant turf wars between state prosecutors and federal prosecutors. If you go back to last December, those officers were effectively at war with one another. Now, something changed just before Christmas, though. The acting United States Attorney, Rhett DeHart, was relieved, essentially. He stepped down from his post voluntarily, but effectively relieved, and replaced by a new U.S. attorney, an interim U.S. attorney by the name of Corey Ellis. Now, according to my sources, since Ellis has come on the case, the cooperation between the federal and state prosecutors has increased significantly. And we've also learned that over that time, the federal investigation into the Murdaughs, which had sort of trudged along and stumbled along during its first few weeks, first few months, really, has begun to gain cohesion, has begun to focus on financial crimes, on banking operations. But we started to get a clearer sense of exactly what the feds are looking at. Now, if you go back to some of the coverage on FITSNews in recent months, we've talked about the feds looking at RICO. We've talked about them looking at predicate crimes. And what I'm talking about there are these settlement scams in which Alec Murdaugh and his allies are accused of defrauding former clients of their law firm of millions of dollars. In fact, at the state level, Alec Murdaugh is currently facing dozens of charges alleging that he stole more than $8.8 million from former clients. So did he have help? That's been one of the big questions of this investigation. And we felt last month, in January, that the South Carolina statewide grand jury, which is investigating these crimes, was going to issue indictments for co-conspirators in this case. Now, that didn't happen, and we were told at the time that inclement weather and COVID cases related to Omicron prevented the statewide grand jury from achieving its objectives. But we're starting to hear now, when no charges came out in the February grand jury, no new indictments, we're starting to find out now that there were deals being cut in the background, that some of the folks who have been implicated in this mess are talking. And they're not just talking to the state, they're also talking to the feds. And folks, if you're not familiar with these stories, let me tell you how it works. Whoever talks first and shares the most is going to get the best deal. And again, that may not mean no prison time, but it would mean less prison time. And if you go to the right people, you might even get your prison time in a cozy federal pen, not the far less friendly confines of the South Carolina Department of Corrections. So as this continues to move forward, as this investigation continues to advance, some of the folks that we're looking at related to these new developments, one big name that's come up is Russell Laffitte. Russell Laffitte is the former CEO of Palmetto State Bank. And this is a financial institution which has a long history with the Murdaughs, a long history with their firm. And the bank is involved on some level, at least cutting checks, receiving checks, related to some of these financial scandals. Now, Russell Laffitte, we know for a fact, has been questioned by federal agents. We also know for a fact that he was deposed just this week by John T. Lay, who was one of the court-appointed receivers over Alec Murdaugh's estate. And again, remember, Alec Murdaugh is not only involved in a number of criminal cases, but there are civil cases he's involved in as well. And a judge in the civil case has appointed John T. Lay and Peter McCoy, a former U.S. attorney, as receivers in that case to make sure that the money that Alec Murdaugh allegedly stole from his victims doesn't magically disappear, and that some of it can hopefully be recovered to pay victims. So John T. Lay deposed Russell Laffitte this week, and that's another major development in this case. And we're told that Russell Laffitte shared much information with the receivers about what he knows about Alec Murdaugh's assets and about what he knows about these various financial scams. But as this case continues to move forward, we are definitely looking at an elevated incidence of federal involvement. Federal engagement has ramped up, and we expect to see many more convoys of Suburbans rolling through the South Carolina low country as they continue to ramp up their involvement in this investigation, which again is now entering its seventh month after that brutal homicide at Moselle last June. So count on FITSNews to keep you up to speed with all the latest developments on that facet of the case. But now we're going to turn to another Murdaugh story that developed this week involving Alec Murdaugh and his family. So as I mentioned, the escalation of the federal investigation into the Murdaugh family wasn't the only big Murdaugh-related news to break this week. Thanks to a Freedom of Information Act request submitted by FITSNews, we were able to obtain jailhouse calls from Alec Murdaugh to various members of his family. Now, this treasure trove of information covers a lot of ground, but one of the first things that I wanted to focus on is this interesting call between Alec Murdaugh and his brother, John Marvin Murdaugh, in which Alec is requesting additional commissary money to be put on the account of another inmate. Let's take a listen to this call.
Hey, John, is Lizzie nearby?
She is.
I talked to her earlier. She was going to put some money on that account for me, and she didn't.
Okay, well, what is it?
This is where she knows what to do. The boy's name is Justin Lucas.
Okay. And what is it then?
It's putting money on. He doesn't get canteen, so I give him some of the money, and he orders canteen. So I'm having to order thermals and all that. I'm having to order ibuprofen because I'm exercising and my knee and my shoulder. And hell, ibuprofen's $15 on there to get a week's supply.
I got you.
So it gives me extra canteen.
I got you. And he doesn't get one?
No, he doesn't get any. So she put it on his account. We just did it one time. We did it last week, and I'm gonna do it one more time.
Okay.
All right, so wait a minute. This guy's running a canteen scam at the jailhouse? It's unbelievable. Okay, first of all, this is completely against all jail regulations. So you're not allowed to put money on another inmate's canteen account. You can obviously see where that could go in terms of creating some interesting conditions in the jail population. But really, I'm starting to wonder here. I don't think this guy has an opioid addiction. I mean, maybe an ibuprofen addiction, clearly. But I don't think he's addicted to drugs. I think this guy is addicted to scams. I think he's just a grifter. I mean, seriously, this is just bizarre. I mean, the guy, forget the, multi-million-dollar scams. I mean, this guy's running a $60 racket in the jailhouse with another inmate. It's just unbelievable. But what a telling look at who Alec Murdaugh is. Again, running scams in the jailhouse, trying to get some extra ibuprofen for his workouts. But anyway, running prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs, I guess, in the jailhouse wasn't the only thing Alec Murdaugh was discussing with his brother. He also discussed briefly the performance of his lawyers. Let's hear that clip real quick.
All right, well, Jim and Dick are working hard, so...
What are they working on? I mean, have all the charges been brought forward?
See, that's what I don't know. I don't know that yet. I don't know. I suspect that if they do it like they've done everything else, they'll sit and wait till something else comes up and then do some more charges.
Right.
But I don't know.
I hate to break it to you, Alec, but something more is going to come up, and there's going to be more charges. And again, I don't know what fantasy world you're living in where you think Jim and Dick are working hard, but again, Jim Griffin, Dick Harpootlian, the two attorneys who are representing Alec Murdaugh, they may be working hard, but I don't know to what end, because let's be honest, their performance during this case from the very beginning has been atrocious. They've mishandled the PR. They've mishandled the legal angles. Their effort to go straight to the feds to cut a deal very early backfired. What have they done right? I don't know, but at this point, I think Alec Murdaugh would be better served by having a public defender. Because again, all that Jim Griffin and Dick Harpootlian have done so far is walk into a courtroom where the Attorney General of South Carolina, his office, said, we agree to this bond, and they walked out with their client being denied bond. It takes a pretty special kind of incompetence to walk into a courtroom where the prosecutors are agreeing to a bond and walking out with no bond. And let me say this, it takes a very special kind of incompetence to do that in South Carolina, where judges are giving bond out for murder raps like candy. But anyway, we'll go back to the performance of Jim Griffin and Dick Harpootlian later. There were also some interesting developments on these tapes, exchanges between Alec Murdaugh and his son Buster Murdaugh. And for that, we've got a clip where we're going to go to right now, one of those interesting exchanges between father and son. Let's listen to that tape.
Several hours.
Columbia, where did y'all fly into?
Charlotte.
Why'd y'all do that?
It's just that was where the cheapest flight was.
What'd y'all fly on?
Spirit Airlines.
How was that?
It was better than I expected it to be.
What does that mean?
Well, I mean, I thought, I don't know, it was better than, I just thought it was a real cheap airline, but I mean, it was nicer than I thought it was going to be.
Did y'all have room in your seats?
The seats were all right. it was, it's just a different, like the seats don't recline because they can fit more. If they don't recline, it's just, it's just different.
It's just different. I mean, the humanity, people. Oh, the humanity. I mean, the seats don't recline. But anyway, what a bizarre conversation between father and son. And again, what's interesting about this clip is this is actually in reference to a trip that Buster Murdaugh took to Las Vegas with his uncle, John Marvin, exclusively reported on by FITSNews. And so it was interesting later in that call, Buster Murdaugh actually complains to his dad about the story on FITSNews.com, his trip to Las Vegas. And again, I don't understand why you would complain about that if your dad's accused of stealing all this money and you're going to Vegas spending money as his power of attorney. Yeah, I think people are going to be kind of interested in that, Buster. I hate to break it to you. I know you didn't graduate law school, but that's something you might want to be a little more alert to next time. But as this call progresses, another thing that we're going to look at is an odd interaction between, again, father and son over a lawyer from Estill, South Carolina named Butch Bowers. Now, this is a name I think we're going to hear a lot of in the weeks moving forward, but let's go to the tape where Alec Murdaugh talks to his son about Butch Bowers.
Did you get back from the D?
No, I was checking my email all day today. I emailed him beginning of this week, and I haven't heard back. I emailed him and
Hold on. You did what?
I emailed him and I CC'd the associate dean, and I haven't heard back yet.
Okay, if you don't hear today, this is Monday, you did it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Tomorrow, you might just shoot a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't hear from him, I'm definitely shooting a follow-up later this week.
Tomorrow?
And if I don't hear from him, I might get in touch with Butch to see if you can call him and say that I've been trying to get in touch with him.
All right.
Is Butch paid all the money that he was owed?
Yes.
Okay.
Up front, and it was up front, and it was $30,000 up front and 30.
I know with a contingency on if it was successful. I'm just making sure I don't want to call him if he not have the shit he has. It was supposed to have.
Nah, he knows he's totally paid.
I mean, would he be willing to do something like that, you think?
Absolutely.
So this is a very curious conversation. Again, it's not immediately clear what's going on, but money was clearly paid by Alec Murdaugh to Butch Bowers, the attorney we were just talking about, and it somehow involves Buster Murdaugh trying to get back into the University of South Carolina Law School. Buster was kicked out of the school The previous year, don't know all the circumstances surrounding that situation. There was some scandal, but clearly Butch Bowers is being called upon to weigh in on that, to perhaps assist Buster Murdaugh in getting back into the University of Law School, and that has raised a lot of eyebrows. Butch Bowers, for those of you unfamiliar, he's a very familiar name. He's represented two former governors, Mark Sanford and Nikki Haley, and he also briefly represented former U.S. President Donald Trump during the disputed election process. Bowers had a very brief stay with Trump, however, after Trump found out about his prior work with Nikki Haley, and clearly Trump and Nikki Haley are not very close. We're going to be talking about Trump here in the next segment, but before we get there, I just want to remind readers, we're going to be delving into this University of South Carolina Law School angle to the Murdoch scandal, because once again, it appears there are some questions that need to be answered revolving the involvement of former Trump attorney Butch Bowers and his involvement with the Murdoch family. So one of my favorite things about running a website is the open microphone policy, which basically I turn my mic over to you. Any reader with an intelligent take on any issue we cover is invited to sound off. And again, I think that's important because I don't want to just tell you what I think. I don't just want to tell you why you should think what I think is right. I want to be convinced too. I want to have a discussion. I want to have an open dialogue. I want to have what Oliver Wendell Holmes called the marketplace of ideas. I want to host that kind of conversation on FITSNews. Well, this week, we were fortunate. Somebody took advantage of that open microphone policy. Former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Mick has a very interesting theory, and he unveiled it exclusively on our news outlet, taking advantage of that open mic. And his theory is kind of cool. It basically holds that former President Donald Trump, his old boss, Mulvaney worked for Trump for over 3 years, first as his budget director and later as chief of staff. His theory is this, that Trump, who is actively involved in 2 congressional races here in South Carolina in the 2020 cycle, that Trump doesn't have to jump right into the presidential race if he doesn't want to. Mick's theory is basically that Trump could use the early voting states, and I'm talking about Iowa, I'm talking about New Hampshire, and obviously first in the South, South Carolina. He could use these states as sort of a vice presidential apprentice. So other Republican candidates who haven't decided whether they're going to run for president or not could run under the auspices of auditioning for the vice presidential job. Now, it's also a way that Trump could freeze out some of his potential rivals who kind of in the frenemy category, like Nikki Haley. And again, we talked about Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina. Obviously, she plays a big role in the Palmetto State, and she's already gotten involved in one of these 2 congressional races, and she's endorsing the incumbent in that race going up against Trump, who has endorsed the challenger. So we've talked about this proxy war. We've talked about Trump getting involved, but Mulvaney's, his take was very interesting. Essentially, he said that, no, Will, you got it all wrong. It's not about Trump working to better his position for the 2024 primary, because Trump really doesn't have to worry about that. Trump's the kind of candidate, he can wait till the last minute if he wants to get in. He's got so much money. He's got so much notoriety, name ID. He doesn't have to approach the race like a conventional candidate. So if you didn't get to read it this week, I would encourage you to go to FITSNews.com and check out the guest column from former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. It was a very interesting take on how Trump could approach the 2024 election process. And again, that's got national implications, people, because again, we're looking at Joe Biden possibly not running on the Democratic side. If that happens, then all bets are off for the first in the South Democratic primary. And if Trump hasn't announced his candidacy ahead of the first in the South Republican primary, then we've got a whole wide open affair on that side of the aisle too. So South Carolina, once again, at the very center of national politics, and Mick Mulvaney, a former state rep, state senator, and U.S. congressman from South Carolina, weighed in on that exclusively on our website. Now, that wasn't the only Trump news, though. We talked earlier about the congressional races that the former president's gotten involved in, very heated races where he's going up against 2 incumbent members of Congress, Nancy Mace in the 1st District down in Charleston, and Tom Rice in the 7th District up the coast on the Grand Strand of Myrtle Beach. And Trump is going again up against both of these members of Congress because they were disloyal to him in his mind. Rice voted to impeach him in the aftermath of the January 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol. Mace condemned Trump in the aftermath of those riots. She ultimately did not vote to impeach him, but she did condemn him in very strong language in the aftermath of those riots. And so Trump is out for blood. He wants to take these 2 incumbents out. And this past week, our news outlet exclusively reported on the 2 challengers that he's endorsed going down to Mar-a-Lago in Florida and participating in a MAGA-Palooza is what the mainstream media is calling it. I actually kind of like that. It's got a good ring to it. But a MAGA-Palooza, where one of Trump's political action committees held a forum, an issues forum for these candidates. Now, again, this was billed as an issues forum, but in reality, it was a fundraiser, okay? One of Trump's political action committees called Make America Great Again, and I'm not joking, that's the actual name of the committee, Make America Great Again, right? Okay. That's the group that held this event down in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, and two candidates from South Carolina congressional races attended. Katie Arrington from the 1st District running against Nancy Mace, and Russell Fry from the 7th District. Now, Russell Fry's attendance at this event was controversial because Fry missed a very important vote in the South Carolina House of Representatives. The House passed a $600 million tax cut, and Russell Fry missed that vote. And Tom Rice's campaign was very quick to call him out and accuse him of playing politics when he should have been back in the State House doing the people's business. So a nice shot in there for Tom Rice, who again is struggling going up against Donald Trump in a district where Trump is very popular. Now, how does the president play this moving forward? It'll be very interesting to see. But what we've seen so far is a guy who is demanding absolute loyalty from these candidates. And in fact, one of the litmus tests that Trump has apparently put forward to these candidates, if they want his endorsement, if they want money from his PAC, if they want the support of some of his donors, they've got to go on the record saying that the 2020 election was rigged. It's a deal breaker if they don't. And if you go back and look right before receiving Trump's endorsement, both Katie Arrington and Russell Fry, the 2 challengers that Trump's endorsed, both went on the record saying that they believed that election was rigged. Now, was it? Guys, I don't know. We've called for some comprehensive election reform that would end any dispute about whether elections were rigged. Unfortunately, that election reform hasn't gone very far in the South Carolina legislature, but it's clear that Trump is making that a key issue as he decides who he's going to support and who he's going to oppose in the 2020 election cycle. Now, for all of the news on this presidential jockeying for position, for all the news on the congressional races in which Trump is involved, keep it tuned to FITSNews.com. We are covering those very closely, but it was a big week for presidential politics and congressional politics in South Carolina. So another big event that happened this week was apparently the launching of World War III, or at least that's what we're led to believe by CNN and the rest of the American mainstream media. Russia invaded Ukraine this week, happened late Wednesday evening. Tanks poured across the border between these 2 Eastern European nations, and the collective gasp from the American foreign policy establishment as they realized that Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator, leader, whatever you want to call him, was making good on his threat to invade this country. Now, if you listen to all the coverage of this invasion in the American media and the Western media, all you get is basically Russia bad. You can sum up the coverage with 2 words, Russia bad, right? And the reality is it's a little more complicated than that. And again, I'm not condoning the invasion of a sovereign nation, okay, people? I don't think that's right. It's not something we should celebrate. People are dying. It's not a good situation. But I do want to rewind the tape a little bit because there's some context that's missing in the coverage from the American media, from the Western media. And that context is pretty jarring when you think about it. First of all, there was a pro-Russian, democratically elected government in Ukraine 10 years ago that was overthrown by an American-led coup. And in fact, not only did we throw the democratically elected government out, an actual official from the State Department of Hillary Clinton was installed as the new finance minister of this new Ukrainian government. Literally, we took a diplomat, an American diplomat, put her in charge of Ukraine's finances. So again, I think about it. What would America do if Vladimir Putin overthrew Mexico and installed a Russian warmonger as Mexico's defense minister? We would collectively lose our S, right? Can I say shit? We would collectively lose our shit. We would. And for us to now say that, okay, this is an act of aggression by Russia, well, yes. But there's a defensive component here because, again, an American-led coup less than 7 years ago threw out a democratically elected government. And again, I keep hearing America wants to make the world safe for democracy, safe for democracy. We hear this all the time, whether we're going to Afghanistan or Iraq and spending $6 trillion on wars that ultimately don't change anything. But we keep hearing safe for democracy. Well, guess what? There was a democracy in Ukraine, and we overthrew it. Don't get me started on that. But let's fast forward a little bit. Let's go to what happened again with Putin's move. A big part of it was that back in September of 2020, Ukraine indicated that it was going to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. This is a big deal because this would allow American military weapons, because again, who subsidizes NATO and its military? Mostly America, right? So this would be American military weapons flowing onto the Russian border if Ukraine joined NATO. And again, we expect Russia not to do anything about this. Again, it's the same thing. It's like Putin going into Canada, right? And saying we're gonna put missiles on the border of Canada. What are you gonna do about it, America? Well, again, we would lose our minds, rightfully so. Again, this is context you just don't get from the mainstream press. They want a simple narrative. They don't want you to think about it. They just want you to say, oh yes, nod. Russia bad. Just nod. That's all they want you to do is just nod. But again, there's so much more to it. And I wrote a big column on the invasion earlier this week, and I made very clear in the intro to that Russia is responding to essentially Western incursion in its sphere of influence. Why should we be surprised this is happening? Now, here's the other question to think about while you're thinking about what the press didn't tell you about why this is happening. Here's the other thing to think about. What are we going to do about it? What is Europe going to do about it? Last time I checked, about half of the natural gas that's provided to Germany, one of the biggest countries in Central Europe, comes from Russia. Comes from a new pipeline they just built in 2011. What's Germany going to do? I don't think much, because guess what? It's going to get hot. It's going to get cold. You're going to need natural gas. You're going to need it for electricity. I just don't think people are thinking this thing through. I don't think they're thinking it through. And I think that the easy answer is, let's blame, the Russian bear. Let's blame Russian nationalism. Let's get, all whipped up into a frenzy over it for people who are literally defending their sphere of influence. And by the way, the parts of Ukraine that Russia's invaded, they've been pro-Russian from the beginning. In fact, that's where the government that we threw out initially fled. Okay? So again, it's not like, I don't know, let the people there determine who their government is, not the United States of America. And by the way, I'm also very interested to see Joe Biden, his response to this, because Biden initially said that the United States would meet this invasion with a full response. Of course, then he said, well, maybe it depends. If it's just a minor incursion, maybe we won't. Well, guess what? Biden, put up or shut up, man. Put up or shut up. Either establish yourself as the emperor of the world with money we don't have, or stay the hell out of Eastern Europe's business. Because the last time I checked, the hundreds of millions of dollars that we have poured into Ukraine ain't working. Russia's winning this war, people. Despite the guns, despite the helicopters, despite the armored vehicles, despite all the stuff that we've thrown into this country, Ukraine's getting its ass kicked, okay? And they're going to get their ass kicked. And there's not much we can do about it except sit back unless we want to start borrowing another couple $1 trillion to fight another war in another part of the world we have no business being. We got problems here, people. We got problems here. We don't have the money to go spending trillions of dollars on another war across the other side of the world. And I think FITSNews readers are with me because I got a poll here. We ran a poll with the article I ran. And we asked people, what do you think? How should America respond to what's going on? Should we stay out of it? Should we send troops? Just sanctions? Well, the results were pretty clear. 52% of FITSNews readers said, stay out of it. Don't go. Don't get involved. Because again, this is precisely the sort of foreign entanglement that George Washington warned us against, the founder of our country. Don't get involved. What happens on the European continent, it just isn't our business. Trade with everybody, but don't get involved militarily in another fight like this. only 12% of FITSNews readers said we should send troops, which I thought was interesting. So clearly FITSNews readers, very independent thinkers, not falling for that mainstream media BS. But this is important because this is a big deal in the world. It's a big deal if you're an American taxpayer. And if you want to just swallow the regurgitated content, the Russia bad from the mainstream media, you're welcome to do that. But if you actually want an independent perspective on this fight, come to FITSnews.com because we got you covered with some actual facts and some actual context about what led up to this war and about what's going to happen next. All right, so that's a wrap for this week's edition of the Week in Review. Is it a video show? Is it a podcast? I don't know. It's we got nice mics. I know that. People are responding. We've been getting a ton of feedback from those listening to the podcast format, from those of you watching on YouTube or one of the other video mechanisms. But I think it's pretty cool that people are sending us stuff, right? I think this is really cool. And I'm a coffee drinker. People know that. People also apparently know that I like hats. I didn't wear one for this filming, but I've got like 72 hats or something. Just a few. My wife really does not like the number of hats I have because they tend to encroach on the closet. But here's a coffee mug from a reader who says that I am very busy and important, which is accurate. I carry a big stick. We won't go into that. Mogul Life, Daily Mail. I don't know why the Daily Mail is on here, but they got the hat, which I think is cool. So that's a cool. So thank you, Jennifer. I think is who sent that in. Thank you, Jennifer. And then our special projects director, Dylan Nolan. His beautiful girlfriend Meg sent me a mug, and this is a very cool one because this is actually I think tied to back in December when I deliberately defied a circuit court judge who had issued a bogus contempt citation, or not contempt citation. She basically told people not to release any information from a public court hearing. And my response to that was, you can't tell me not to release something from a public court hearing. So here's a picture of you at that court hearing. What are you going to do about it? And Meg, our director of special project, Dylan Nolan, his girlfriend, sent me this mug, which says some things, am I holding it straight? There we go. Sometimes it's just worth the jail time. I love that, man. I love that. And Dylan, I don't know if you've been using this mug, dude, but this is pretty nasty. Have you been using this? Have you been stealing my mug, dude?
Guilty.
I mean, that is, we won't even look at it. Don't look at that. We don't want people to see that. If you're listening on the podcast, there's a fungus among us, basically. But here's the deal. Whatever your feedback is, whether you want to send us nice stuff, that we'll always take it. But what we really want is your feedback. What we really want is your take on what we're doing. Because, again, the more honest you are with us, the more you tell us exactly what you think about what we're doing, the better we're going to get at it. And the better we get at it, the more we can hold people accountable, the more we can hopefully improve outcomes in the state of South Carolina, which is a place which desperately needs improved outcomes economically, academically, with infrastructure, you name it. We desperately need to improve. And that's what we're here to do, to try to push the state to be better, to do better. And your feedback on our work helps us be better. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for listening. Catch us next week on the FITSNews Week in Review.